Okay. We are live with Alexander Mercouris in London and Mr. Gonzalo Lira in Kharkiv. How are you gentlemen doing this afternoon?
Well, I'm doing extremely well. I'm having a wonderful day. It's a beautiful hot day here in London. Very, very sunny, but of course, delighted to be on the program. And with Gonzalo as well, always a pleasure to have Gonzalo on our programs. And obviously, we've got big news to discuss.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on, rather. And we do. I have very big news to discuss. My motorcycle battery is recharging, so I'm going to be motorcycling around here because we have also gorgeous weather out here in Ukraine, and just a little bit of the smoke from that battle going on off to the east. But other than that, it's great motorcycle weather, and I'm just so cheered up because it turned out that the battery that I thought was dead and with everything closed, I wasn't going to be able to replace it. Well, it has come back to life. I've nursed it to health, and so I am in an incredibly good mood. And so we can talk about the evacuation of Azovstal. Yes.
Yes. The evacuation. Yes.
The evacuation.
Let's see. Welcome to everybody who's watching us on Odyssey, on Rumble as well, on YouTube, of course, to our community on Telegram. We do have a very, very active community on Telegram, so look for us there as well. And to our fantastic community on Locals. And the chat on Locals is always an amazing chat, full of a lot of great information and comments. Thank you to our moderators who are helping us out with this live stream. And I don't see any moderators right now. I don't see any of the blue wrenches right now in the chat, but I'm sure we'll have some moderators jumping in real soon. So
Alex, you can make me a mod. Wrench me, and I'll be happy to moderate.
I'll be helping out in the moderation as well as we go through the big news of the day. And gentlemen, we have to talk about Azovstal. I think that's the big news of the day. Real quick, we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can from the viewers. We'll go for about 2 hours. And real quick, actually, let me just answer the super chats that just came in right now, and then we'll get into Azovstal and the evacuation of Azovstal. The evacuation. New Guardian says, "Hi, Coach. Congratulations on never getting cancer. I hear the Americans want to send 40 billion worth of cancer your way." That is from New Guardian Gonzalo. From Alan Shepard, would appreciate if you guys have a map of Ukraine when talking about the military operation. We will do that, Alan, on the recorded shows that we do. We try to get that in there. On the live shows, it just needs a little more coordination, but I'll try. Yeah. I'll try to get that up there as well. Possum Power, thank you for that super chat. Lads, any update on Kaliningrad? Remember that, Alexander Gonzalo, Kaliningrad.
Yeah,
we could discuss that as well. And some final questions real quick, and we'll get started. I'll pass it off to you guys. From Commander Crossfire says, on the reports of average age of the UAF troops in Donbass being over 40, do you think this could be malicious intent, as that age group would have, and this is one of 6, would have on the reports, would have been born Russian and might have a predisposition to accept dictate from Moscow, as opposed to the younger generation that knows only Ukrainian and West fascist propaganda? A callous calculation, but a believable endeavor by the West. Just look at the biolabs. The thing to remember, the West sees Ukrainians as Russians because they are, irrespective of how some radical Ukrainians might view themselves. As exampled by rich Russians being sanctioned. They may have believed their wealth bought them into the Western club, but the West always viewed them as Russian. Explains why they are super willing and eager to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian, because either way, it's a dead Russian. Sorry, it's a long one. Don't be sorry, Commander Crossfire. I think Alexander and Gonzalo got what you're talking about with that question, and they'll address it. And Talatin, thank you for that super chat. Balke says, surrender, not evacuation, please. Very well said. Balke, we'll get into that. John Hancock says, Coach, should we stay subscribed to your Patreon? Real quick, Coach.
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalo Lira, should they stay subscribed?
Yes, the thing that's happened is that because I lost my phone, I've lost access to email accounts that included that. But I'm working on a workaround, and so I'll be able to have access to that account once again, and I will be restarting the Patreon shortly. And I'm so sorry to my Patreon subscribers, but I'm literally locked out. It's like being locked out of your house. It's incredibly annoying. And you know, you're trying to break in, and you know, I'm in the process of convincing the cops that no, this really is my house. So once that's all finalized, I'll be back on Patreon and making up for the material that I haven't been posting there. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much, Zishan. Thank you for that super sticker. Joe Public says, "Where are the scribbles?" It's a very, very good super chat right there. Where are the scribbles? David S., thank you for your super sticker. And the final questions, and we'll get started, is from Novus Black. Says, "Bits for the Bit God" from Odyssey. Thank you very much, Novus Black. And Novus Black says, "Plant a garden, homeschool your kids, get an extra blanket, say hello to your neighbor, buy some extra long-lasting food. When there's a sale, learn the basics of carpentry, buy a book about the local flora and fauna, and buy a detailed map of your surroundings. Ungovernable through independence." Well said, Noah's Black. Gentlemen, Azovstal. Some people are calling it an evacuation. Some people are calling it a surrender. Let's also talk about a little bit about Commando Crossfire Super Chat and the age of the fighters. Let's talk about Kaliningrad. Let's talk about all the news. Sammy says, "Gonzalo, do you have a Telegram channel?" Gonzalo, you don't have an official Telegram channel, not yet. So I will answer that. Not yet. And Tyler Durden says, "Keep it up, gents. Great content." And Toilet Sauce says, "You have to love the spin of the MSN. No mention of surrender or POWs. No, comrade, they are being evacuated. Just don't say they're heading to Russian-controlled territory." Alexander Gonzalo, the floor is yours.
Well, can I just start with what the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying? And this is the briefing by the Russian Defense Ministry. They do usually 2, sometimes just 1 briefing every day. They begin with these words: "The surrender of fighters from the Azov Nationalist Unit and Ukrainian servicemen blocked at the Azovstal plant in Mariupol began yesterday." So they use the simple, straightforward word surrender. So that's the Russian take. Now, we've heard lots of stories, lots of accounts about how these people are going to be exchanged, how they were ordered to lay down their arms, and there's going to be an exchange eventually, and that negotiations are underway about that. I'm going to say straight away that the Russians have said nothing about any plans or any discussions to exchange these people. As far as the Russian officials' statements are concerned, this is a straightforward surrender, apparently made without conditions. So an unconditional surrender of the troops in the Azovstal factory. I think we ought to say that because, as various people have been commenting, it's been referred to across the Western media with other words as an evacuation. That's the favored word. That, of course, all originates from the Ukrainian authorities. And it's actually, I find it really rather shocking, actually, how we're simply using euphemisms that the Ukrainian authorities are engaging in to describe an event where the word surrender surely is the right one.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you look at the dictionary definition of surrender is when you give up your willingness to fight an enemy and give yourself over to the mercy of that enemy, which is what is happening in this situation. An evacuation is when people who are stranded are moved away from that stranded position by people on their side. I'm not giving the best Merriam-Webster definition, but that's roughly it. This is a surrender. And what I said yesterday when I heard that they were coming to some sort of agreement, I said, and you're going to have to forgive my vulgarity here, but I said, I wonder what kind of brazen bullshit the Zelensky regime will come up with. And here you go. They just redefined the language. I mean, this is very, Lewis Carroll through the looking glass, words mean whatever I want them to mean. This is absurd. Now, what's very interesting is that there are reports. Now, this is unconfirmed, but there are reports that the Russians who are taking custody of these individuals, that is, accepting their surrender, are screening them, filtering them very, very carefully.
They are checking their real identity against their paper and against Russian databases that they have. They are strip searching them insofar as looking for any fascist tattoos. And they are strip searching both the men and women who are coming out. Because do keep in mind, a lot of these women, they are very beautiful. The one that was the two women there that were, greeting the Pope in that famous photograph and looking so tearful, because their husbands are Azovstal. Yeah, well, both of those women are covered with swastika tattoos underneath their very prim and proper clothes, And so anyway, the Russians are doing that. They're fingerprinting and photographing these individuals. Of course, the ones that require medical attention are getting medical attention. But what's interesting is that they are being held under guard. And once they are recovered from their injuries, they're going to be transferred to the POWs. And here's the interesting thing. The ones who are considered harmless, that are just regular soldiers, they're going to be in regular Russian POW camps. The foreign low-level mercenaries are going to be criminally prosecuted. The high-level NATO staff are, in all likelihood, now this is all rumor at this point, but in all likelihood, they're going to be turned over to the FSB, which is the Russian version of the FBI/CIA. And they're going to be, in all likelihood, but this is rumor at this point. I mean, nobody's confirming this for obvious reasons. The word is that these people, are the high-level foreigners, are going to be shipped to Moscow for future debriefing and, of course, for political purposes. Now, here comes the interesting part. The Azov fighters, those who are known to be of the Azov battalion, those who are known to be ideologically driven, they will not be exchanged in any POW swap. And this is very important because the Russians are very firm on the issue that they are going to prosecute every single individual who committed atrocities against the Donbass in the previous 8 years. I mean, they're extremely serious about this. The only POWs that they are going to swap are those that they know for a fact are innocent of any war crimes and who are just regular soldiers. Those are the only ones who are going to be swapped in any kind of POW swap that might arise in the future. Because at this time, there is no agreement between the Zelensky regime and Russia for a prisoner swap. Yeah, that's what I have to tell you.
Absolutely. Can I just say, if you drill through the Ukrainian comments, the official comments from the Ukrainians, even the Ukrainians do not say that there is any agreement for a prisoner swap. This is not what the Ukrainians are saying. What they're saying is that they are in discussion with the Russians about some kind of an agreement to set up a prisoner swap. So this is a hope, if you like, from the Ukrainians. It is not a done deal. And can I just say, Gonzalo, you're absolutely right. The FSB undoubtedly will have a role in looking and correlating these people. Bear in mind that Azov is a banned organization in Russia. It is there classified as, well, essentially a terrorist outfit. I mean, that's the Russian view of it. So, and the FSB has an anti-terrorist role. But there is another organization which is a straightforward law enforcement organization and which is perhaps closer in its functions to the FBI, which exists in Russia, which is the Investigative Commission. And its chief, who's a man called Bastrykin, has recently been in Donbass, and he's actually, it seems, working to set up, war crime trials, if that's what the Russians decide to do. But no, he is. He's actually there. He's been collating information. He's got a team of investigators, and I'm absolutely sure that he will be very interested in these people. So it's this talk about an exchange, this talk about an evacuation, the talk about mission accomplished is. I mean, it's just spin. I mean, it is a straightforward surrender of people who really, in truth, ought to have surrendered a while back. They were not achieving anything by holding out in the factory in the way that they were. They weren't pinning down contrary to what is claimed, large numbers of Russian soldiers or anything like that. I mean, they were a nuisance for the Russians, but they weren't anything more than this. And this surrender should have taken place a long time ago. And of course, one is rather interested, one is curious to find who exactly is going to turn up out of the factory. Now, I'm not going to make any speculations about this. There's all sorts of wild stories circulating. But what is incontrovertible is that the Ukrainians, before the siege really tightened, tried to evacuate at least some of these people from the factory. And it'd be interesting to find out who they are. My own guess, by the way, is that they're Ukrainians, and that the point about trying to evacuate them from the factory is that they were important in the Ukrainian power structures, and that was why the decision was taken to try to extract them from the factory at so much cost. I'm going to also, by the way, express a personal interest, which is that there's this Ukrainian commander, Sergei Volina, who has been giving lots of rather emotional videos. I'm very curious to find out what his exact role in both Azov and in the Marine unit actually is, because I understand that there's some suggestions that though he's claimed at various times to be the commander of the regular troops from the regular Ukrainian armed forces in the Azov plant, there's some denials that he actually is, and that he's in fact really an Azov person. Well, I'd be very interested to see. This is just my own personal curiosity. But anyway, this brings this episode to an end. And I just wanted to say one very last thing, which is I think that the Ukrainians built up this story. They made out these people to be heroic fighters, Spartans at Thermopylae, and all of this. It reminds me a little of what happened in 2015 when there were Ukrainian troops holed up in the airport at Donetsk, and they too were built up into sort of heroes. And of course, when the resistance collapsed in Donetsk airport, it had an effect on Ukrainian morale. And I suspect the same will happen with the surrender of these people at the Azovstal factory. Anyway, that's me. Over to you, Gonzalo. You were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think, too, that that's why they are so furiously spinning this whole issue as, it's an evacuation, not a surrender. And the spin is monumental. I mean, the ability to fool yourself and for other people to allow themselves to be fooled, because, come on, we're all grown-ups. None of us is that stupid. And so the fact that everybody is marching along to this ridiculous notion that this is an evacuation, it's just ridiculous. And so it seems to me, and this is, you, Alexander, said that you're not going to speculate because you're not one to speculate irresponsibly, because of course you cannot, because that is my department to speculate irresponsibly. And so my irresponsible speculation is, I think that probably the situation in eastern Ukraine and Donbass is much, much worse than we realize, not in terms of the actual map, but in terms of morale, in terms of the men just being at their wits' end. I also believe, too, that there must be an enormous amount of pressure coming from the family members of so many of the men fighting. Because, these babushkas, these wives, these children of all these fighters, the amount of social media pressure, it must be overwhelming for the Zelensky regime because, as they say, live by the sword, die by the sword. Fine. Live by the social media, die by the social media. And I think that they must be feeling the heat and, to the point that they're kind of like afraid to step outside insofar as social media is concerned, for fear of getting attacked by mothers, wives, daughters, children of fighters, and saying, this is crazy. You have to end this. This is pointless. And so I think that a lot of that must be going on. I'm not giving a specific point to this, but I'm just saying that must be a very large factor. And that's why they're so furiously spinning this as an evacuation. Rather than what it is, a surrender. Because if it were to be played as a surrender, if it were to be played straight, or even if those men had been allowed to die, because that was Zelensky's original idea. The Zelensky regime wanted those men to die, potentially to have a bunch of martyrs. And I don't think that the men in the Azovstal were very keen on being martyrs. And so there you go. Here we are in this situation. I think that the Zelensky regime would have preferred martyrs, because that would have been like, fight on for the men of Azovstal kind of thing, and rally the troops and blah, blah. But, a destruction of those men or their surrender is a PR disaster, particularly the surrender, because it gives other soldiers the idea that maybe surrendering is the smart idea. And that's the issue. I think that they are desperate to avoid that, because armies, when they collapse because enough soldiers decide this is not worth fighting anymore, and they raise their hand. That's how an army collapses. And so that's why I think they're terrified of labeling this a surrender.
Absolutely. Can I just also quickly say that Mariupol, up to this point, has been the biggest battle in the war in Ukraine. I mean, we've been hearing lots of stories about battles. There's the battle for Kiev, which in my opinion was never a real battle. There were some skirmishes around Kiev, but there was never this kind of battle. This is a real big battle. I mean, thousands of troops. Ukraine especially committed thousands of troops to defending Mariupol. Perhaps it was a mistake to do that, but they did. They made a big symbol out of Mariupol. The entire garrison of Mariupol has now been either killed or wounded or taken prisoner. So this has been an unequivocal, clear-cut defeat for Ukraine. Now, we don't hear about this. We don't hear the word defeat mentioned very much, but this is what this is. A clear-cut, conclusive defeat. The first, if you like, cauldron, encirclement to achieve its objective. The first battle, if you like, the first big battle, and it's the one that Ukraine has lost. There's more battles coming. Now, I wanted to I'm going to touch on this question about the 40-year-old soldiers and whether this might be a deliberate demographic policy. I see the argument, but on balance, I don't think so. I think that throwing older men into the battle in that kind of a way, rather than your younger, perhaps more motivated men, isn't going to change the demographic balance in Ukraine in your favor. It is going to do what Gonzalo was saying. It is going to demoralize your army and your society and lead to people protesting in social media terms. It's not, to my mind, a sign of a policy. It's a sign of a government that is running out of manpower, running out of human resources to throw into the battle. So I don't think this. Also, it seems a lot of these 40-year-old men are coming from Western Ukraine, which is an area where, there are not, frankly, many pro-Russian people anyway. So I don't think that these people are the kind of people who, from Western Ukraine, who, even if they're in their 40s, would characterize themselves as Russians, even if the West likes to sometimes, think of them in these terms, or has thought of them in those terms. So I don't think this is correct. I think that this is not a strategy, a political or demographic strategy. It's rather a symptom of a military that is running out of resources, running out of fuel, running out of ammunition, running out of tanks, and running out of men, and whose morale is probably starting to slip, exactly as Gonzalo says. Now, on the other point, though, about, setting East Slavs, Russians, if you like, and Ukrainians against each other, I think there may be some truth to this. I mean, certainly you find a lot of Russians who talk in this way, that this is a terrible tragedy that these two fraternal nations have been turned against each other and are fighting this kind of war, and that the West benefits from it. I mean, that I accept, but I don't think that this is a deliberate policy to sacrifice an entire demographic in order to alter the political balance in Ukraine. So that's, I just wanted to address that particular point.
Yeah, and I also want to add to your point, there's something very important. See, the territorial defense forces that Ukraine has numbers something like 300,000 or a quarter of a million men. I forget. It doesn't really matter. The point is that, see, this territorial defense, excuse me, it's I have it right here in front of me. It's 130,000 volunteers. Here's a key issue: the territorial defense forces, which are being used in the East, they acquired their members. Their members joined with the understanding, if not the explicit commitment, that these territorial defense forces would be local. If you joined in, say, Lviv, you would be the territorial defense force of Lviv. If you joined in Kiev, you'd be in Kiev. You wouldn't be shipped to the Donbass. That was the agreement. And so I think that there's a lot of demoralization. I agree with you that the reason that these old men, and well, they're frankly younger than I am, but these old men are fighting here is that they've run out of the young men. The young men have either are under arms or they have fled. They are underground, either in the country or they've fled elsewhere, either to Russia or to the West. And do keep in mind, I suspect that a lot of young men, of fighting age men, slipped over to the Russian side. Not because they wanted to join the Russians, but because the border between Ukraine and Poland is a lot more policed than the border towards Russia. And the Russian border patrol, on seeing some Ukrainian young men, would understand, oh, these guys are fleeing the potential conscription, and they'd be a lot looser. Whereas the Polish border guards would have the opposite approach.
Yeah. Can I just say on this, and I mean, just to also follow up on that point, I mean, there was a lot of commentary in the West, in Britain, about how Zelensky is now saying that, Ukraine's going to call up 1 million men. Now, this is two things to say about this. First of all, I mean, this is all over the media here in Britain. The BBC was running it as its headline for a while. I mean,
really?
First of all, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the BBC was talking about an evacuation yesterday. It somewhat scaled that down, by the way, this morning. I think even they realized that they couldn't really sustain that claim that this is an evacuation. But of course, if you really do try to enlist 1 million men, you're going to do two things. Firstly, you're going to provoke an enormous amount of opposition in your own country. I mean, believe me, I mean, in this kind of situation, trying to bring together 1 million men into one particular force, I mean, the amount of people who will oppose this, who will, resist it, who will come out and protest against it is going to be huge. And the second is that, of course, Zelensky doesn't mean it anyway. I mean, it's just a thing that he says. He says lots of things, and it's staggering to me that the BBC and these media organizations took that claim seriously. But anyway, I as I said, I don't think...
Can I just...
Yeah.
Sorry, Alexander, can I just make one point on that? Doesn't it also, a question to you and to Gonzalo, doesn't it also give you a window into how Zelensky, I was going to say Zelensky, how Zelensky, how Zelensky and the mainstream media, the BBC, and even people like Lloyd Austin, doesn't it give you a window as to how they view the Ukrainian society and Ukrainian men when they just say, yeah, just throw 1 million of them there, because our strategy at the end of the day is to weaken Russia. We don't care who perishes. We don't care who suffers. We don't care if it's 1 million men, 2 million, 3 million. For them, these are just numbers. Yeah, 1 million. Throw 1 million. That's fine. Throw 2 million, as long as we get the destruction and the regime change in Russia that we want. This is a question to you, Alexander, and to you, Gonzalo. I mean, it does give you a window into how they think, because they don't see these as people. They don't see these people fighting as having families, as having loved ones, as wanting to go back to their wives or their girlfriends or just hanging out with their buddies. They don't see that. They just see numbers. Throw them there. Throw them there.
It's that they don't. Neither Zelensky nor Lloyd Austin view the Ukrainian people as their people, because they're not. And so because of it, because of ethno-religious differences on the one hand, and the other hand, racial and ethnic and national differences, of course, they don't see the Ukrainian people as their people, that they have to look after. They don't see it that way at all. And so, there's that disconnect. And you can go back to, say, for instance, the First World War, where the aristocratic class in Europe, especially, they felt themselves to be of a separate class, of a separate category than the common people in their own nations. And was the case with the German, French, and British aristocracies that went ahead and threw away the lives of countless millions of their own people, because that is what has happened in our society. The on the one hand, the elites have become disconnected from the working classes, the lower classes, call them what you will. They become completely disconnected from them, and in point of fact, they sort of like look down on them and want nothing to do with them, on the one hand. And on the other hand, in this particular case that you're mentioning, Alex, well, the Zelensky and Lloyd Austin do not view the Ukrainian people as their people because they are not. And that's why they treat their lives so cheaply and in such a despicable manner. That's my thinking.
I entirely agree. Can I just say, and I think this is an important point to make, I think you will find much more empathy and concern for Ukraine and its people on a program like this from people like us. We really care about Ukraine. And I think this is a point to make. We really care about the people of Ukraine. We think this war is a catastrophe for Ukraine. I am personally revolted by this use of countries as, pawns in some elaborate geopolitical chess game. And then I go over to the BBC and I go over to other parts of the British media, and I read these, extraordinary triumphalist accounts of often fictitious battles. And some, I'm going to say, incredibly bloodthirsty commentaries that I sometimes read there. And it goes directly to the point that you made at the start of this discussion, Alex, that these people are not really interested in the lives of the people of Ukraine. They're not interested, obviously, in the lives of the people in Russia. They're not concerned about the fact that these people have families, that they have children and parents and brothers and sisters and wives in the great majority of these soldiers who are fighting. As far as they're concerned, this is some sort of great geopolitical game, and these people are expendable. They don't even really exist in any true sense. And I find it deeply disturbing. And if the West really cared about Ukraine, they would be doing that which we have been urging right from the start, not just over, since the start of this war, but since, the Maidan crisis, even before. They would be advising Ukraine to negotiate peace. When there was that meeting in Istanbul back in March, it looked as if a negotiation might be about to get underway. And it was the British and Americans who blocked it. And that was utterly wrong and deeply shocking. And it has profoundly shocked me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's no way to go back on negotiations. Look, the thing is, before we started the show, chat, the three of us were talking, and we were basically a little nervous because we're thinking, this thing might end very quickly. And I think that to tell you the truth, it feels that we're getting there to that moment where the whole thing just collapses. And I just pray that it happens as quickly as possible, because every day that this is prolonged, it's more dead Ukrainian men who are irreplaceable, because the people who love them, all of them, there will be broken hearts everywhere, and it's for nothing. Do you know how many Ukrainian soldiers are being lost per day? Estimates are between 400 and 700 per day. Yeah. That is an astronomical number. No country can long survive this way. And so I just pray that this war ends quickly, because every day is just more death for nothing.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I would also add, by the way, that a commander, which is who Zelensky is, should never have allowed his soldiers to fight on pointlessly in Azovstal in the way that he did. These people could have been instructed to lay down their arms weeks ago with no change, no difference to the overall state of the battle. And except, of course, in morale terms, if you like, this is always a PR thing at Azovstal. And I mean, it was incredibly cynical and actually deeply shocking. And by the way, just to also say that when the Azovstal, when Mariupol was first blocked, and it became clear back in March that it would certainly fall, I also remember that the Russians at that point offered the Ukrainians the option of evacuating all their troops from Mariupol, and the Ukrainians refused. And in fact, they refused repeated offers from the Russians to evacuate, to lay down their arms, to do these things. Now, you know, if there is a point in fighting, if there is some achievable objective, then by all means, I can understand that from a logical military point of view. I'm not a military person, but I can just about understand that. There was no military logic in this. The Ukrainians are trying to spin this by claiming that, you know, the defense of this garrison in Mariupol somehow saved Zaporozhye. There's no evidence that the Russians had any plans at this stage of the war to attack Zaporozhye. This is pure inference, pure speculation. It's not even that, it's just spin, ultimately. And there are, in fact, very, very strong political reasons why the Russians would not want to attack Zaporozhye, which is that the most important factory there, the Motorsich factory, is owned by the Chinese.
It's so much. It's so disconcerting that the Western analysts they keep on ascribing to Russia that Russia has certain objectives and motives and timetables, and they're just making it up out of whole cloth. And of course, they say, "Oh, Russia is going to do this by May 1st." And of course, Russia doesn't do that because they have a completely different objective. And so May 1st rolls around, and these commentators say, "Oh, the Russians are losing because they didn't do X by May 1st. Therefore, since the Russians are losing, that means that Ukraine is winning." Because for them, if one side is losing in their idiotic black-white mentality, the other side must be winning, of necessity. And that's the insanity that has gripped these people, these commentators, because they're fools. And the level of self-delusion. I want to pivot a little bit in our conversation to talk about this journalist from Al Jazeera, this very pleasant middle-aged lady whose name slips my mind, who was wearing a blue helmet and a blue vest that said press on it. And she was a very well-known press person for Al Jazeera. And she was shot in the head and died instantly. And Forbes, the Forbes.com, the news magazine, they actually put out, but then they retracted, a statement along the lines of a bullet impacted a journalist in the head, instead of saying the IDF shot this journalist, because that's what it was. It was a Israeli sniper who shot this poor woman. And of course, I'm sure you gentlemen saw the video of her funeral, which was a complete and utter disaster. And with the Israeli occupying forces bludgeoning people and hitting them, and the casket nearly falling as the pallbearers are carrying her to the church, because this woman was Christian. And they are carrying her casket to the church, holding her casket up, as these security forces, quote unquote, are bludgeoning them and beating them and kicking them. And of course, in the West, they're like, "Oh, nothing happened. It was just a stray bullet impacted her in the head." It's just absurd, the level of delusion, the level of deceit. I'm sick and tired of the deceit that the Western media pushes on every front. That's the thing that I think is driving me a little bit nuts. The level of deceit. Sorry for running, guys.
Well, can I also say, though, I mean, at least you have journalists who go to the front lines in that part of the world, in the Middle East. You notice the total absence of Western journalists to any extent in Donbass, where this titanic battle is taking place. Now, can I just say, I think that we are in an interesting moment. I don't know that it's a tipping point or an inflection point, but there's a number of things to say. Firstly, it seems to me that the sanctions program is now running into severe problems. I mean, gas for rubles has now essentially won. We discussed this I mean, they've all, the EU is, pulling up the white flag there. The oil sanctions are in a mess. They can't be agreed. They've accepted that the oil can be shipped around by EU tankers. That undermines the whole idea of an oil embargo anyway. So that doesn't look like it's going to work out as it should. So oil sanctions, energy sanctions are not working. The financial sanctions have been a complete failure. Last time I looked, which is just before we started this program, ruble is trading at $64.50 to $64.50 rubles to the dollar. So it's stable, and we now get this accumulation of news from the battlefields in Ukraine. Firstly, obviously, we've had Azovstal, the end of the battle in Mariupol, which is, as I said, so far the biggest single battle in this conflict. But we're also getting more and more information that in Donbass itself, in the northern Donbass region, around Severodonetsk and all of these places, the Ukrainian forces are now being isolated from each other, encircled, broken up into penny packets. The Ukrainian counteroffensives around Izium seem to be failing. And by the way, for what it's worth, the great Ukrainian counteroffensive north of Kharkiv seems to be going into some kind of reverse, at least in some places too. So we are looking at a situation where the sanctions war is sputtering and failing, and where the military situation is now taking a very, very difficult turn for Ukraine. Now, I tend to agree with you, Gonzalo, that I think that Ukraine is running out of resources. They're talking about, how this flood of Western weapons is going to change the battle. They're talking about launching their own counteroffensive in August. But these are the same people who can't talk straightforwardly about what's happened at Azovstal. Why should we believe them?
Well, look, first of all, this notion that in August there's going to be a counteroffensive, if this continues until August, I will assure you that it will mean that Russia is in complete control of the entirety of the country, because there is no way that this conflict lasts until August. There is no way that they can assemble the men and the material for any kind of counteroffensive by August or any other time. It's over. It's over. It has become a police action at this point. And so the issue, of course, is, when is the Ukraine army going to wake up to reality? That's the only question at this time. Now, insofar as to pivot to the European sanctions, look, there was a lot of talk. I love to speculate, but I'm not one for conspiracy theories. I do believe that Elvis is dead and Paul is alive and Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Okay, and if anybody disagrees with that, be my guest, but I'm going to stick with it. I am not one for conspiracy theories at all. And so when I heard the notion that maybe part of getting the Europeans to go with sanctions was the Americans were deliberately trying to harm the European economy, I heard that and I thought, no, that's too 4D chess. That's too Machiavellian. And the people in Washington, the gang that can't shoot straight. But now I'm starting to wonder, because these Europeans, they seem so hell-bent on destroying their own economies. And the notion of the oil embargo, which, one country, Hungary, is the only one really sticking up and saying, no, this is a horrible idea and we're not going to accept it because it would kill our economy, so we're not going to allow it. And you guys need unanimity for a policy like this. The only one country out of however many there are that spoke a little bit of common sense here, this leads me to conclude that there's something either deeply wrong with the European leadership. I mean, wrong like psychiatric wrong, because nobody can be insane, or that there really is some sort of weird conspiracy and that this is a deliberate drive to destroy the European economy. Because, Germany is being deindustrialized, forcibly deindustrialized, in a way that hasn't happened since the Second World War. And all the work of the last 70, 80 years that has gone into the German economy to make it, what it is today, it's being just thrown out the window. I don't understand what's going on. And the only winner here, clearly, are the Russians. The Russians are beautifully winning this economic war of attrition, as you correctly call it. And the Americans are not winning, but they're losing less than the Europeans. The Europeans are the. And I certainly do not think that in 5 years we're going to have a European Union. I think that the whole thing is going to collapse. The euro is slowly sinking. Well, actually, not so slowly, quickly sinking. It will soon reach parity with the dollar, which we have not seen since, I do believe, 2003 or 2004. This is a disaster. I'm sorry for sort of like ranting all over the place, but I can't get over the horror that we are witnessing.
Well, can I just say, I think there's a lot of different things all happening at the same time, and don't underestimate the way in which the European political class itself has authored its own destruction and that of the European economy. Can I just say, I mean, Janet Yellen, who is the US Treasury Secretary, tried to warn the Europeans off against oil sanctions. But Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel and all of these people, they wanted to go ahead anyway. And they had the support of the Green Party in Germany. So, I accept there are probably some people in the US who would want that. But there are others, Janet Yellen, for example, who presumably don't. I mean, so she warned them publicly. She said, don't do it. But they wanted to go ahead and do it. And you're quite right that Hungary, Orban, talked sense, and nobody else had the courage to come out openly and do so, which is really damning about the state of the European political class. But about the risk of deindustrialization, the risk of destruction of the European economy. Well, we've now had the president of the BDI, which is the biggest German industrial union. He's come out today, or I think it was yesterday, actually, and he's actually said cutting ourselves from gas would be a catastrophe. Now, how they have ever got themselves into these situations is beyond comprehension, but they did. But remember, they also took that disastrous decision to de-SWIFT the Russian banks, to sanction the Russian central bank, to do all of these things. And of course, it's not just the Europeans who are paying the price of that. The US is paying the price of that too, because it is accelerating the development of alternative payment systems. But anyway, that's a big topic. We'll discuss it, I think, in more detail eventually in maybe a separate program. But anyway, that's what I want to say about all of these. Well, I mean, again, Finland joining NATO. By the way, I'd like to say Putin's words on this have been completely misrepresented. It's been suggested that he's, says, Finland joins NATO. It's not something we particularly oppose because we don't have issues with Finland. What Putin actually said was, there is no logic in Finland joining NATO because we have no quarrel with that country. And up to now, they have had no quarrel with us. So why are they being dragooned into NATO? It is because one country, namely the United States, wants them to join. That's what Putin actually said. His words were, again, twisted and taken out of context. He wasn't softening Russian opposition to Finland joining NATO. Now, Finland joining NATO, Sweden joining NATO is a huge mistake by these two countries. They are throwing away the protection that neutrality gave them. In the case of Finland, it actually gained hugely from the fact that it was neutral. It had an excellent relationship, firstly with the Soviet Union and then with Russia, which has been completely jeopardized and put at enormous risk. And of course, it's now going to be part of a battle line. And again, it's impossible to see, as Putin said, how that actually helps Finland. And I would add the other thing it's done, though I don't know how seriously to take this, though his latest comments on the topic are, extraordinarily strong. But I mean, it's also given Erdogan another nice new tool to bargain with and to extract a very, very heavy price from the West. I mean, his latest comments on Finland and Sweden, which appeared over the last couple of hours, are extraordinarily strong. And if you take them seriously, if you take them as read, which I don't, by the way, but if you do, then I mean, what they would imply, I mean, it's difficult to